Have you ever been so cold, so deep in your bones cold, that you could see your own breath crystallize in the air inside your own apartment? Not as a funny party trick, but as a grim reminder of your own helplessness. That was my reality last winter, a winter that turned me from a quiet, rent-paying tenant into an accidental investigative journalist. Hello, my name is Gloria, and this is the story of how my landlord's refusal to fix my heat led me to uncover a secret he was willing to risk everything, including my safety, to protect. It all started when I moved into what I thought was the perfect Chicago apartment, a charming pre-war brownstone in Lincoln Park, with high ceilings, original hardwood floors that groaned like an old man settling into a comfortable chair, and a beautiful bay window that overlooked a quiet, tree-lined street. It had character, you know. It wasn't one of those sterile, cookie-cutter new builds. It felt like a home. My landlord, Mr. Alistair Finch, seemed fine, a bit aloof, maybe a little too fond of wearing tweed jackets in September, but he was polite enough during the lease signing. He cashed my checks on time, and I paid my rent on time. It was a simple transactional relationship. The first hint of trouble came in late October. The nights started to get that signature Chicago bite, and the old cast-iron radiators that lined the walls of my apartment remained stubbornly, icily silent. I wasn't too worried at first, but as November rolled in, bringing with it the first flurries of snow, the silence from the radiators became ominous. My charming apartment was turning into a very expensive, very beautiful icebox. And my requests to Mr. Finch, they were met with a frustrating, infuriating, and ultimately life-changing wave of indifference. Little did I know, his negligence wasn't just about saving a few bucks on a repairman. It was about concealing a much larger and far more dangerous secret humming away right beneath my feet. Before we embark on this incredible journey together, I have a small, heartfelt favor to ask. Please subscribe to my channel, give this video a thumbs up. It costs you nothing, but means the world to me, and let me know in the comments which beautiful corner of the world you're watching from. Your support truly makes all the difference. The transition from chilly to genuinely uninhabitable was swift. One week, I was wearing a hoodie around the house. The next, I was sleeping in 3 layers of clothing, a wool hat, and so many blankets it felt like I was being buried alive. The beautiful bay window, my favorite feature, was now my enemy, leaking cold air like a sieve. I could trace my name in the frost that had formed on the inside of the glass. My communication with Mr. Finch began politely. A simple text message. "Hi, Mr. Finch. It's Gloria from 3B. The heat doesn't seem to be working. Could you please look into it?" His reply, a day later, was dismissive. "Building heat is on. Old radiators take time to warm up. Be patient." Another week passed. The temperature inside my apartment hovered around 50 degrees Fahrenheit. That's about 10 degrees Celsius for my international friends. Patience wasn't cutting it anymore. I called him. "Mr. Finch," I started, my teeth chattering slightly. "It's been over a week. My apartment is freezing. I really need you to send someone." "Gloria," he sighed, his voice dripping with condescension, as if I were a child complaining about a broken toy. "The boiler is operational. I was there myself last week. Sometimes certain units don't get as much flow. Try bleeding the radiators." He gave me a cursory, unhelpful explanation of how to do it. I spent an entire afternoon with a radiator key and a bucket, coaxing nothing but a few sputters of frigid water from the valves. The radiators remained as cold as tombstones. I documented everything, every text, every call, every email. I took screenshots and saved them to a dedicated folder. I started taking daily photos of a thermometer I'd placed in the middle of my living room. 45 decaf. I was building a case, though at the time, I just thought I was being a diligent tenant who might need to break her lease. The worst part was the feeling of being completely ignored. It wasn't just the cold, it was the disrespect. I was paying a significant portion of my freelance graphic design income to live in this place. to a man who couldn't be bothered to ensure it met the most basic legal standard of habitability. His refusal felt personal. Why? Was he just cheap? Or was it something else? His excuses became more and more absurd. "There's a parts shortage. My usual guy is on vacation in Florida. Are you sure you're not just leaving the windows open?" That last one was the one that broke me. It was so insulting, so patronizing, that my simmering frustration boiled over into cold, hard resolve. I was done being the polite, patient tenant. Mr. Finch had made it clear he wasn't going to help me, so I decided I would have to help myself. My first step was practical. I went to a big box store and bought 2 powerful space heaters. As I plugged them in, watching the coils glow a defiant, cherry red, I felt a small flicker of victory. It was a temporary solution, a Band-Aid on a gaping wound, but it was my solution. That night, huddled in the small bubble of warmth they created, I had no idea that those heaters and the massive electricity bill they were about to generate would be the first thread I'd pull that would unravel Mr. Finch's entire secret life. Living in a bubble of electric heat was a strange existence. My living room became my entire world. I'd set up my workstation, my sleeping bag, and a small cooler with snacks all within a 10-foot radius of the 2 space heaters. Leaving that circle of warmth to go to the kitchen or the bathroom was a physically painful experience, a mad dash through the Arctic tundra of my own apartment. My electricity bill, predictably, tripled. I sent a copy to Mr. Finch with a polite but firm email stating that I would be deducting the overage from my next rent check. His response was a single, terse sentence. "Unauthorized alterations to the utility usage are the tenant's responsibility." I was furious, but also felt a growing sense of isolation. Was I the only one? Was there something uniquely wrong with my unit? I needed to know. My savior came in the form of Mrs. Gable from apartment 2B. She was a sweet, elderly woman who had lived in the building for over 30 years. I'd see her in the hallway sometimes, a tiny woman with a cloud of white hair and eyes that crinkled at the corners when she smiled. One particularly frigid Saturday, I ran into her by the mailboxes. I was bundled up in my full outdoor gear, parka, hat, scarf, just to get the mail. She gave me a knowing look. "Heat still out in your place, dear?" The question was so direct, so validating that I almost burst into tears. "You have no idea," I said, my voice cracking. "He keeps telling me it's on, that I'm imagining it." Mrs. Gable patted my arm with a hand that was surprisingly strong. "Oh, honey, that's Alistair's favorite song. He's been singing it for years. He's a cheapskate, always has been. His father, the man who owned the building before him, he was a gentleman, kept this place pristine. Alistair? He inherited the property but not the pride. He cuts every corner he can find." We stood there for 20 minutes, the cold mailroom air fogging around our words. She told me stories, the time the roof leaked for 6 months into the top-floor apartment, the time the hot water was out for 2 weeks in August. In every instance, Alistair Finch was a master of delay, denial, and deflection. He would do the absolute bare minimum, usually only when threatened with legal action by the city. "He's banking on people giving up," she concluded, her voice low. "He knows it's a hassle to fight, a hassle to move, so most people just suffer through it or leave when their lease is up. He just counts on the turnover." Talking to Mrs. Gable was a revelation. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't being overly demanding. I was just the latest in a long line of tenants Mr. Finch had decided to ignore. But her words also sparked a new question in my mind. If he was just cheap, why was he so adamant about not letting a repairman into the building? A simple boiler fix, while expensive, would be a one-time cost. My constant complaints and the potential for a city violation seemed like a bigger, more persistent headache. It didn't add up. There had to be another reason he wanted to keep people, especially maintenance workers, out of the building's guts. That night, as I huddled by my heaters, I heard something new. Over the hum of the electric coils, there was another sound, a deeper, more consistent hum, seemingly coming from the floorboards. It was a low, vibrational thrum, the kind of sound you feel in your teeth more than you hear with your ears. I'd never noticed it before, but now, in the profound, cold silence of the apartment, it was unmistakable. It was constant, it was steady, and it was coming from the basement. The hum became my obsession. During the day, the sounds of the city, the distant wail of a siren, the rumble of the L train a few blocks away, would mostly drown it out. But at night, it was the only sound in my frozen world, a deep, resonant, and unnervingly consistent drone. It wasn't the familiar groan and clank of a boiler kicking on. I would have wept with joy to hear that sound. This was different. It was electronic, industrial. My freelance work suffered. I found myself staring blankly at my monitor, trying to focus on a logo design, but my mind was consumed by the vibration under my feet. I started mapping it. I'd lie on the floor, pressing my ear to the cold hardwood, trying to pinpoint its source. It was strongest in the center of the building, directly below my living room. That would put it somewhere in the heart of the basement. Then, I started noticing other things. Little anomalies that I had previously dismissed. Mr. Finch's visits, for one. He never came during the day. He'd arrive in his sensible Volvo station wagon well after dark, usually between 10 and 11 p.m. He wouldn't come up to my apartment or anyone else's. He'd just let himself in the front door and head straight for the basement entrance at the back of the ground floor hallway. He'd be down there for an hour, maybe two, and then leave as quietly as he arrived. What kind of landlord only visits his building's basement in the dead of night? The other thing was the lights. A couple of times a week, the power in my apartment would flicker. Not for long, just a split second, enough to make my laptop screen blink and the space heaters momentarily cut out before roaring back to life. I'd assumed it was just a quirk of an old building with ancient wiring. But I started keeping a log, and a pattern emerged. The flickering often coincided with a slight change in the pitch of the hum from the basement, as if a massive amount of power was being drawn for a moment, straining the building's electrical system to its limit. My curiosity was now warring with my fear. I knew snooping around my landlord's property was a bad idea, but the alternative, sitting in the cold, being ignored, and slowly being driven mad by a mysterious noise, was worse. My graphic design skills are all about observation, about seeing the patterns and connections that others miss. I decided to apply that same skill set to my own building. I started paying more attention to the basement door. It was a heavy, windowless steel door with a serious-looking industrial keypad lock next to the handle. That was strange. The rest of the building used old-fashioned keys. Why did the basement need a high-tech security system? One night, emboldened by a mix of frustration and 2 glasses of cheap wine, I crept downstairs after I heard the front door close behind Mr. Finch. I hid in the shadow of the main staircase, my heart pounding against my ribs. I heard the faint beeps as he punched in a code, the heavy click of the lock disengaging, and the groan of the door opening. A wave of hot, dry air washed out of the opening, a stark and shocking contrast to the frigid hallway. It smelled of ozone and hot plastic. It was the air of machinery, of servers, of something working very, very hard. He slipped inside, and the door clicked shut behind him, the sound echoing in the silent hall. Hot air, in a building with no heat. The irony was almost comical. The pieces were starting to form a picture, but I couldn't yet make out the image. I knew one thing for sure. Mr. Finch wasn't down there fixing the boiler. He was hiding something. And I was beginning to think that whatever he was hiding was the real reason my apartment was an icebox. I needed to get into that basement. The thought terrified me, but the mystery was too compelling to ignore. How could I get past a keypad lock? I couldn't. But maybe I could create a situation where Mr. Finch had to let me in, or at least let a professional in, with me watching over their shoulder. The plan that formed in my mind was risky and felt like something out of a spy movie, but I was desperate. I focused on the one thing landlords universally fear: water damage. My bathroom was directly above a section of the basement. I waited for a day when the forecast called for a deep freeze. That morning, I turned off the water valve to my toilet, flushed it to empty the tank, and then used a sponge to get every last drop of water out of the bowl. Then I took a small cup of water from the kitchen and carefully poured it into the bowl, just enough to cover the bottom. I opened the bathroom window a crack, letting the Arctic air rush in, and left it that way all day while I worked at a nearby coffee shop. By evening, the water in the toilet bowl had frozen solid. Phase 1 was complete. The next morning, I turned the water valve back on. The tank refilled, but when I flushed, the ice in the bowl didn't allow the flap to seal properly. Water began to run continuously, a slow, steady stream. It was a common plumbing issue, but I was about to escalate it. I took a hairdryer and carefully heated a small section of the porcelain base of the toilet until it was warm. Then I took an ice cube from my freezer and pressed it against the warm spot. A tiny, almost invisible hairline crack formed. It was perfect. I called Mr. Finch, injecting a note of panic into my voice. "Mr. Finch? It's Gloria in 3B. My toilet is leaking. I think it might have cracked from the cold. There's water all over the bathroom floor, and I'm worried it's going to leak into the ceiling below." For the first time, I had his full attention. The threat of property damage was the magic word. "Don't do anything. I'm on my way," he said, his voice tight with alarm. He arrived in record time. I had strategically placed a few damp towels on the floor to sell the story. He barely glanced at me, pushing past to stare at the toilet. He saw the running water and the minuscule crack. "Right," he muttered, turning off the valve himself. "I'll have to call a plumber. He'll probably need access to the basement to check the pipes below for any damage." It was working. My heart was hammering. The plumber, a grizzled man named Sal, arrived 2 hours later. Mr. Finch was visibly on edge, hovering over him. "Just need to pop down to the basement, check the subfloor and the drain pipe," Sal said, wiping his hands on a rag. Finch hesitated for a fraction of a second too long. "Fine, but be quick about it. The wiring down there is sensitive." He reluctantly led the way to the steel door, punched in the code, and swung it open. As Sal descended the stairs, I followed, feigning concern. "I just want to see how bad the damage is," I said innocently. Finch shot me a venomous look, but couldn't object without looking suspicious in front of the plumber. The moment I stepped onto the top stair, I understood everything. The blast of heat was overwhelming, like opening an oven. The air thrummed with the noise I'd been hearing for weeks, now amplified into a deafening roar of cooling fans. And the site, it wasn't a basement. It was a server farm. Rows upon rows of black metal racks were crammed into the space, each filled with dozens of humming computer components. Thick bundles of cables snaked across the floor and ceiling, all converging on a series of massive, jury-rigged power distribution units that were wired directly into the building's main electrical panel. Red and green lights blinked in the dimness, reflecting off the sweating copper pipes on the ceiling. It was a chaotic, illegal, and incredibly hot mess. Sal just grunted. "Found your problem," he said, pointing up. "Pipe's fine. Your landlord here is running a sauna. The temperature difference between your frozen apartment and this furnace room is what cracked your toilet. Thermal shock." I quickly, surreptitiously, lifted my phone, which had been recording video from my coat pocket. I panned it across the room for a few precious seconds, capturing the racks of servers and the chaotic wiring. Finch, who was busy arguing with Sal about his diagnosis, didn't notice. I had it. I had the proof. This wasn't just about a broken boiler. This was a full-blown illegal operation, and my landlord had turned our entire building into a fire trap to run it. I walked back to my apartment in a daze, the plumber's words, "thermal shock," echoing in my head. The raw, unfiltered fury I felt was quickly replaced by a cold, methodical clarity. I finally had the why. Mr. Finch wasn't just a cheap landlord. He was an amateur criminal. And the heat from his secret operation was the very reason he couldn't turn on the building's boiler. The combined heat from the servers and the radiators would have turned the basement into a literal oven, frying his equipment and likely tripping the main breaker constantly, if not starting a catastrophic fire. He was sacrificing the well-being of his tenants for his own shady profit. I uploaded the blurry video clip from my phone to my laptop and watched it a dozen times. It was shaky, but it was undeniable proof. Racks of hardware, a web of dangerous-looking cables. It looked like a fire marshal's worst nightmare. But what was it? I needed an expert. I immediately thought of my friend Leo, a cybersecurity analyst and unapologetic tech geek I'd known since college. I sent him the video with a simple message. Urgent and weird question. What is this? His reply came less than 5 minutes later, a string of texts. Whoa, where did you get this? That, my friend, is a crypto mining farm, a big one. And based on that wiring, a ridiculously illegal and dangerous one. I called him. Leo, it's in the basement of my apartment building. My landlord is running it. There was a long whistle on the other end of the line. Gloria, you have no idea how much trouble he's in. First, zoning. You can't run a commercial data center in a residential basement. The power draw alone is a massive violation. Second, look at that wiring. He's probably bypassing the meter for some of it, which is straight-up utility theft. And third, the fire risk is off the charts. That setup has zero commercial-grade ventilation or fire suppression. One short circuit in there and the whole building goes up like a tinderbox. Everything clicked into place. The astronomical power usage, the flickering lights, the refusal to let any repairman into the basement. Mr. Finch had gambled that his tenants would be too passive or too intimidated to ever uncover his secret. He had underestimated me. Leo and I talked for an hour, formulating a plan. My initial instinct was to go to the police, but Leo advised a more strategic approach. The police might just see it as a landlord-tenant dispute at first, he explained. You need to hit him from the angles that will get an immediate, non-negotiable response. You're not just a cold tenant anymore. You're a concerned citizen reporting a major safety hazard and utility fraud. The plan had 3 prongs. The Department of Buildings. I would file an anonymous complaint about illegal commercial activity in a residential zone, focusing on the unpermitted, hazardous electrical work. This would trigger an official inspection. The Fire Department. A separate anonymous tip about a massive fire hazard, specifically mentioning overloaded circuits and a lack of ventilation or fire suppression systems in a basement full of electronic equipment. The Utility Company. This was Leo's brilliant addition. I would contact their corporate security and fraud division. They take electricity theft very, very seriously. Unlike a city agency that might get bogged down in bureaucracy, a utility company losing money acts fast. I spent the rest of the day meticulously preparing my case. I organized all my evidence, the timeline of my communications with Finch, the photos of my thermometer, my inflated electricity bills, Mrs. Gable's written and notarized statement about the building's history of neglect, and the crown jewel, the video from the basement. I would be the anonymous source, feeding them everything they needed. Mr. Finch thought he was playing a simple game of attrition with a tenant. He had no idea I was about to bring in the regulatory equivalent of an airstrike. Revenge, I was learning, is a dish best served by the City Code Enforcement Office. I initiated the attack on a Tuesday morning. I used a pay-as-you-go burner phone I'd bought for cash just to be safe. I made 3 calls, spacing them about an hour apart. I was calm, clear, and concise. To the Department of Buildings, I was a concerned neighbor who had seen suspicious equipment being moved into the basement late at night. To the Fire Department, I was a former contractor who had briefly been in the basement and was horrified by the fire hazards. To the Utility Company, I was an anonymous informant with specific knowledge of a massive power theft operation at the address. I gave them the facts, hinted at my treasure trove of evidence, and then I hung up. I tossed the phone in a public trash can halfway across town. Then I waited. It was the most nerve-wracking 48 hours of my life. I barely slept, jumping at every sound in the hallway. I worried I'd overplayed my hand, or that the cogs of bureaucracy would grind too slowly. The strike came on Thursday afternoon. It wasn't a dramatic, sirens blaring raid. It was far more insidious and, in its own way, more terrifying. It started with a single, unassuming white van from the utility company. 2 men in navy blue uniforms got out and started examining the external electrical meters. A half hour later, a city-owned sedan pulled up, and a man and a woman in crisp shirts with clipboards emerged. Department of Buildings. I watched from my bay window, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I saw them knock on the main door. When no one answered, they started making calls. 10 minutes later, Mr. Finch's Volvo screeched to a halt at the curb. He got out, his face a mask of confusion and annoyance that quickly morphed into panic when he saw who was waiting for him. The conversation on the sidewalk was tense. I couldn't hear the words, but I could read the body language. The inspectors were calm and implacable. Mr. Finch was gesticulating wildly, shaking his head, his face turning a blotchy red. The utility guys stood by, arms crossed, looking grimly satisfied. Eventually, with a look of utter defeat, Mr. Finch unlocked the main door and led the small procession inside. I heard their footsteps in the hall below, then the telltale beeps of the keypad and the heavy click of the basement door. Silence. For what felt like an eternity, there was nothing. Then I heard a new sound, a single, authoritative male voice raised and echoing up the stairwell. More muffled conversation followed. About 20 minutes later, they all emerged. Finch looked like he had aged 10 years. His face was pale, his tweed jacket rumpled. He wouldn't make eye contact with anyone. One of the utility workers came out carrying a massive pair of bolt cutters. He went to the main electrical meters and with a loud snap, cut the thick lead security tag. He then proceeded to physically disconnect the entire building from the power grid. The lights in my apartment flickered one last time and died. The hum from my space heaters vanished. The building was plunged into a sudden, profound silence. The only noise was the low, dying whine from the basement as the server fans spun down for the last time. The inspectors taped a huge, bright orange "Order to Vacate" notice on the front door, citing imminent peril from hazardous, unpermitted electrical installations and illegal commercial use. Mr. Finch was handed a stack of papers that I could only imagine were violation notices and summonses. He just stood there, stunned, as the officials got in their cars and drove away. He had lost. He wasn't just facing a fine for not fixing my heat. He was facing a mountain of violations, massive fines, criminal charges for utility theft, and the complete shutdown of his illegal cash cow. I hadn't just gotten his attention. I had systematically and legally dismantled his entire secret world. My victory felt Pyrrhic at first. I was standing in a now silent apartment that was not only still freezing, but also had no electricity. The orange "Order to Vacate" on the front door wasn't a suggestion. It was a command. The entire building had been deemed uninhabitable. My carefully orchestrated revenge had, in a very real sense, rendered me homeless. The irony was not lost on me. Mrs. Gable knocked on my door an hour later, her face etched with worry. "Gloria, what on earth is going on? They shut off the power." I explained everything: the hum, the basement, the crypto farm, the anonymous calls. She listened, her eyes wide. Instead of being angry at the outcome, she reached out and hugged me. "Oh, you brave, foolish girl," she whispered. "You did what none of the rest of us ever had the courage to do." That night, the tenants of the building had an impromptu meeting in the dark, frigid hallway, our faces illuminated by the glow of our phone screens. There was confusion, anger, and a lot of fear. Where would we go? What would happen to our leases, our security deposits? I became the reluctant center of attention as I explained the situation. While some were resentful of the disruption, most of the anger was directed squarely at Mr. Finch. I had exposed a danger we never knew we were in. Leo, my tech-savvy friend and co-conspirator, insisted I stay with him. I packed a suitcase by flashlight, my breath pluming in the air, and left my charming, freezing, powerless apartment behind. The next few weeks were a blur of bureaucratic chaos. The city's housing authority got involved, classifying us as illegally displaced tenants. Mr. Finch, it turned out, was in a world of trouble far deeper than I had imagined. The utility company was suing him for over $250,000 in stolen electricity. The city was levying fines that climbed into the six figures for the zoning and code violations. And because the electrical system was so dangerously and illegally modified, the entire building needed to be completely rewired before it could be reoccupied, a massively expensive and time-consuming job. Mr. Finch, it turned out, was not some wealthy slumlord. As Mrs. Gable had hinted, he had inherited the building, but had very little liquid cash. The crypto farm was a desperate high-risk gamble to generate income without having to sell the property that had been in his family for generations. He wasn't a Bond villain. He was a man in over his head, making a series of increasingly terrible and selfish decisions to try and stay afloat. I didn't feel sorry for him, but I understood the pathetic, desperate motivation behind it all. He was forced to put the building up for sale in an as-is condition to cover his legal fees and fines. It was snapped up by a large professional property management corporation. For a month, I lived in limbo, unsure if I would ever be able to return. I had won the battle, but it felt like I had lost my home in the process. Then one day, I got a call from a representative of the new management company. They were honoring all existing leases. The building was undergoing a complete renovation, new wiring, new plumbing, and most importantly, a brand new high-efficiency boiler system. Because of the unusual circumstances, they offered all the displaced tenants the option to return at their current rent, with a 1-year rent freeze as a gesture of goodwill. It wasn't a jackpot. It wasn't a massive settlement. There was no movie-ending moment where I was handed a giant check, but it was something better. It was my home. 3 months later, I moved back into 3B. The difference was stunning. The apartment was the same, with its charming high ceilings and groaning hardwood floors, but it felt safe. The first time the new radiators hissed to life, clanking and groaning as hot water rushed through them, I nearly cried. I stood in the middle of my living room wearing nothing but a t-shirt and just basked in the glorious, enveloping warmth. The hum from the basement was gone, replaced by the quiet, reassuring thrum of a brand-new, professionally installed boiler. Mr. Finch was gone, a ghost of Landlord's past, buried under a mountain of lawsuits and debt. I heard through Mrs. Gable that he had to sell his family home as well and move away. My victory wasn't loud or spectacular. It was quiet and warm. It was the simple, profound satisfaction of a safe place to live. It was the knowledge that I had been pushed into a corner, and instead of just accepting it, I had pushed back. I had found my voice, not by shouting, but by meticulously collecting evidence and using the system to my advantage. This whole ordeal taught me that sometimes the most satisfying resolutions aren't the ones where the hero gets a parade. They're the ones where you get what you were entitled to all along, a safe, warm home. It was a complicated, messy, and stressful fight, but every time I walk past my thermostat and see it set to a comfortable 72 degrees, I know it was a fight worth winning. My name is Gloria, and I survived the winter,